Welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Lewin. Today, I'm joined by someone who brings both deep policy and political experience to the energy conversation, the CEO of the Conservative Energy Network, John Szoka. He's a rare voice in today's political landscape, committed to clean energy, not in spite of his conservative principles and values, but because of them. John served 10 years in the North Carolina House of Representatives in many different leadership positions, including as the House Republican Conference Leader, Chairman of the Energy and Public Utilities Committee, Chairman of the Joint Legislative Commission on Energy Policy. He sponsored a number of major bills that passed and became law to take advantage of low-cost clean energy and help ratepayers. John is also a veteran. He graduated from the United States Military Academy, served for 20 years, and after he retired as a lieutenant colonel from Fort Bragg, he has owned several businesses, including a manufacturing business, has 2 U.S. patents. I would be remiss if I didn't say he earned his master's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Hook 'em. John is now leading the Conservative Energy Network, which is active in 25 states, including Texas, operating as the Conservative Texans for Energy Innovation. They see firsthand what happens when bills like Senate Bill 819, which I've been covering a lot at the Texas Energy and Power newsletter, get enacted in other states. What happens when the heavy hand of government starts to regulate private property rights, limit the ability of rural landowners and communities to earn revenues from renewable energy and battery storage? We talked about all those things. We talked also critically about how the ability to build things in the United States, John called us a nation of builders, has kind of gotten away from us a little bit recently in the United States, and how we need to get it back. We need to build new generating sources, new transmission, and much, much more. We talked about what it looks like when Republicans take the lead on clean energy. What's the conservative vision for an energy future that includes renewables, batteries, energy efficiency, gas, nuclear, a true all of the above vision? This is a timely conversation with everything happening in the United States. We talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and what to expect out of Congress. We talked about what's happening in Texas right now. Very timely conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, please like, rate, and review the Energy Capital Podcast. Please send a note to friends and colleagues to listen to the Energy Capital Podcast. Your word of mouth is really making a difference. This podcast is really catching on, and your support is absolutely vital for that. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. John Szoka, welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's great to be talking with you today. Been looking forward to this. Obviously, CEO of Conservative Energy Network. I have so many questions for you, John, but let's just go ahead and start with just a brief bit of your background to start the conversation. I want to start with your time in the North Carolina legislature. You were an elected official. Obviously Republican elected official, and chaired the Energy and Public Utilities Committee, the Joint Legislative Commission on Energy Policy. Can you talk about that experience, what you learned there that you bring to this position in the Conservative Energy Network? Probably helps also to help our listeners just understand what the Conservative Energy Network is real briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, briefly, the Conservative Energy Network is a network of state organizations under the umbrella of CEN. We operate in 26 states, and we do 2 major things. One, we have people that work in each one of the 26 state capitals that mainly educate state legislators on energy issues: solar, onshore wind, batteries, nuke, geothermal, any kind of energy you can think of. They educate them on it. And one of the main things that's needed is education, because there's a lot of mis and disinformation. And let me use myself as an example, kind of tying into how I became the energy chair in North Carolina. When I first got to North Carolina legislature, here's what I knew about energy. When you go to the wall switch and you flick the switch up, the lights go on, or when you push it down, the lights go off. And I had a lobbyist come to my office who represented North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. She asked me, "What do you think about solar?" And I said, "It's just a bunch of garbage, and it wouldn't exist without massive solar or federal subsidies." And she said, "Oh, that's interesting. We have a different viewpoint." And I go, "Oh, what's that?" So she told me what their viewpoint was. And the 2 points here was, one, I knew that she was a Republican representing this solar association. So she was already kind of the trusted messenger of information. And then 2, she told me something that went against what I thought I knew. And because it was from a trusted messenger, I thought maybe I need to examine what I'm thinking. Long story short, went on this 6 month journey of investigating solar and onshore wind and found out that what I thought was true was not true. So I went from being a skeptic of renewable energy to the champion of it in the legislature. And second term there, I did a lot of things and really got involved. And eventually I was the chair of the Energy Committee, the co-chair of it.
John, real quick, what year was that when you had that conversation with?
That was in 2013. I was elected in 2012, took office 2013. So it's a little bit different today. There's a lot more people who know more about renewable, but there's still a lot of folks who go into public service with the same attitude I did when I was first elected.
No, look, and I think that perspective of what I know is when you flip the switch, the lights come on, that is the vast majority of people, right? I mean, I haven't worked on energy forever, and there's just certain things. It's kind of, what do they say about a technology you don't understand? It's like magic. Electricity's still a little bit like magic to me, right? And I think it's really important to understand that people, particularly policymakers, but it's true for the general public, if they want to get involved in public policy, which I'm hopeful a large number of people do, they may just not understand that. And I think, really anything about energy, and that's okay, right? As long as you know, you don't know, and you ask questions, right? You learned, you became an expert over your years there.
And you're absolutely right. It's okay not to know, and it's okay to have wrong ideas that you firmly believe in. What's not okay is to be so secure in your ignorance that you make bad decisions. That's not okay.
Yep. So talk to me about, as you're going through that process, and like you said, you come in with this perspective that solar is just heavily subsidized. It's not really worth that much. You obviously have enough of an open mind that you can learn about this stuff, but you also have conservative principles, right? That Can you talk about how conservative principles overlap with this area of sort of clean energy, it's called a lot of different things. Energy expansion, a lot of people in Texas call it, and some people call it energy transition. Some don't like that. But whatever you call it, we're in a moment in energy, right? Things are changing fast. And so even as your viewpoint is changing, you have principles that aren't changing. Can you talk about what those are and how those interact with your work on energy policy?
Yeah, absolutely, because conservatives believe in a number of principles that don't change. We believe in free markets. I think markets, generally speaking, are better than directives from government in figuring out what the public wants and how they're going to pay for it. I think that as a legislator, constituents come first, and with energy, affordability is a big issue. You might have the best idea in the world, but if it's going to cost $1 gazillion, why would you push that just for the sake of whatever? So affordability is obviously something that's, we talk about clean energy, land. Do you get to tell me what I get to do on my land? It shouldn't be like that. And yet there's a lot of people who think that because they don't like fill in the blank, whatever form of energy it is, that they can tell me what I can do on my land. I can't put solar on there. I can't put wind. I can't put a nuclear station. It's like, we have property rights in this country, and people should be able to use their own land for whatever they decide is the best use of it. I can start from there and continue on down, but those are kind of like really underpinning ones.
Yeah. Free markets, private property rights. So one of the things I definitely wanted to ask you about, and that's a good segue right into it, is we're obviously recording here at a time when Senate Bill 819 is about to be considered in the Senate. We're recording the day before the hearing. We're recording on March 26th. The hearing will be on March 27th. This is a bill that it's very interesting. In Texas, I think if any legislator of either party put forward a bill that really restricted oil and gas development on private property and said, you as a, there's a whole organization right in Texas called TIPRO, the Independent Producers and Royalty Association, right? There's a long history of people making money off of oil and gas wells on their land, or oil and gas deposits, beneath their surface. And the Texas legislature barely regulates that at all, very, very lightly. And if anybody put forward a bill and said, you've got to ask anybody within 20 miles if you can earn money from a gas well on your land, well, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, they'd be in a lot of trouble. And yet here we are with a bill very similar to one that passed last session. So you could certainly talk about that bill, but I know this is something that you guys work on around the country. We keep seeing these different siting proposals come up. Tell me a little bit about your work there, what you think of some of these proposals, and again, kind of how do those conversations go when you're talking to a self-described conservative Republican who wants to limit what somebody can do on their own private property? Like, how do they even defend that?
That's a great question. And the way I talk to them is I don't do that initially. The first thing I do when I'm talking to a state legislator or a congressman or U.S. senator, whoever is, I show them a copy of our mission and our goals and our principles. And, private property rights is on there, free markets is on there, all these things. So I start with an initial, like, we agree that we as conservatives believe in all these things, right? And they say, yeah, of course we do. We believe in all that. And then I kind of explain the issue on energy and increasing demand all across the nation. We have to meet this somehow. So how are we going to do it? And then they say, yeah, we need to do that. And I say, well, look at your state of Texas, for example. You're leading the country in solar and wind. And they look at me and I pull up the ERCOT alert app, which I love that. I keep it on my phone. I think I showed it to you last week. And I say, if solar and onshore wind are so bad, why is it that right now, as we're talking at 11 a.m. or 3 p.m. or whatever it is, that 75% of the energy going into ERCOT grid right now is things that you say you really don't like? And they go, well, humph. I say, I can answer what it is. It's because it's the lowest cost at this time of day for the 12 hours when the sun is shining. So people don't do it in Texas. The ERCOT doesn't put it on the grid to satisfy some liberal mandate from Washington, D.C. or from anywhere else.
No, we're a market that's it's economic dispatch. It's whatever the lowest cost is gets dispatched.
Sense. Yep. And then if nothing else, sometimes, usually the light goes on and people start thinking about it and they kind of fall off their hard-held false beliefs that it's just a bunch of liberal gobbledygook, and they say, well, I didn't know that. And it's like, that's why I'm here. And and that scene is repeated day in and day out in all the 26 states we work in, not only at the federal level, but at the state level. And I've got people down at the local level that deal with siting. There's just, people just don't know because energy is so incredibly complex. They need to be educated.
Yeah, I think, on the private property rights, I was as I was researching to write an article about Senate Bill 819, I found this quote from Ronald Reagan where he says, I'm quoting, this is from his A Time for Choosing speech. He said, what does it mean whether you hold the deed or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And I don't know if you've seen this a lot in North Carolina. I've talked to a lot of people in Texas who have ranches and farms and say, but for the wind and solar on my land, I wouldn't have been able to keep it. John Davis, a former Texas legislator, has had I put a picture of him and his ranch in that same article. The ranch's been in his family since the 1880s, and he didn't think they were going to be able to hold on to it till he got some wind turbines. Like, what gives the government the right to tell you can't, earn some money from your land?
You are 100% dead on. There's 2 farmers I'm aware of in my own county that leased out their land for utility scale solar. And I remember one, he's passed now, but he was kind of a cantankerous old cuss, just to say. And sure. And if he was sitting here, he would say, "You're damn right I am. I love it." But we drove around as they're putting things in. I asked him the question, I said, what do you say to people? Because there are some in the legislature, not me, because I knew what it was like. I said, what do you say to people who say that they should have a say on what you do on your property? And he went off. It's like, look, it's not, I couldn't stop him for about 6 or 7 minutes. It's my land. over here I cut the trees 50 years ago, and I did this over here, and I improved the drainage. And by the way, I don't like the Corps of Engineers. Yeah. And he went on and on and on. And he said, I'm leaving this for my kids because none of them want to farm, but the land is important to me. It needs to make money. This is the best way to do it. And that type of story, the one you just said, the one I just said, is repeated time after time after time all across rural America. And yet there are people who are maybe this guy's neighbors or somebody else's neighbors who say, you can't do what you want to on your land. And it baffles me how they can really think that when they're conservatives and they're tied to the land. And it's not like you're having a subdivision. I mean, you build a subdivision with houses, it's not going away. I mean, solar,
Yeah.
no, you could lease this up, you could take it all out and farm the land. Wind, yeah, it takes up a little bit of land, but you farm around it. So
Yep. And even solar, right? We're starting to see a lot of agrivoltaics too, which I'm really excited about because there's the ability to do certain kinds of farming. You can't do everything when there's solar panels for sure, but some kinds of farming and agriculture work quite well with it. And the stories are important because it's important to really understand that there's people behind the numbers. But in Texas, the numbers are pretty staggering too, right? Something on the order of a little more than $20 billion in landowner payments, local government tax payments, with a line of sight to about $50 billion. That's just within the state of Texas. I mean, it's been pretty transformative to rural Texas and I think large parts of rural America, right?
It is, and it baffles me, particularly in the great state of Texas, why somebody would put this bill forward and why anybody else would think it's a good idea. Most conservatives say we're for all of the above, and then the ones who don't like something, except fill in the blank, except solar, except wind, except geothermal, except you're either for all of the above and let marketplace forces work, or you're really not, and you're just trying to pick a winner and a loser, which we all say we don't pick winners and losers. So,
yeah. And look, I think, there are certainly some, stories out there of developers who did things the wrong way, whether it be wind or solar. But that is not you can't, that's sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, or, you got to make sure that I don't know if this has ever come up, and have you seen any good examples of where, I don't know if you guys did this in North Carolina or maybe in other states where there's got to be a way to, deal with the really bad ones without doing like Senate Bill 819 does, which is painting with this really broad brush and making it that almost, no renewables can be developed. You can answer that one. I actually, what I really want to get to next, and you can put that answer in there if you want to, but what I really want to get to is what I think is causing these bills more than the few bad cases. I really think there's so much misinformation rolling around particularly the internet, Facebook posts, and then, somebody looks at it and the algorithm drives them 10 more stories about, solar panels polluting water or something, as if solar panels are worse for water than, confined animal feeding operations or oil and gas operations. There's a million things that cause environmental harm. And if you're stacking them in a list, solar and wind are somewhere on the list, but they're not near the top. But I think the misinformation just bounces around so much, all these different stories of all the negatives. And that's the way the algorithms work, right? You click on that, then you're not going to get a positive story about a farmer or rancher who now has his farm or ranch because he's got solar wind. That story never appears in your algorithm. How did you combat that when you were at the legislature? How do you deal with that at Conservative Energy Network? I know I'm asking a really big question here.
Well, that is a big question. And how long do we have? 45 minutes now?
Take as long as you need. It's a podcast, okay. John. Go ahead.
In North Carolina, once I finally understood how solar worked and how onshore wind worked and what they did or didn't do to the environment, it was we get in closed caucuses, and we'd have these arguments. And I had somebody tell me, well, that's all great, but did you know that solar panels leach cadmium and other heavy metals into the ground? And it's I've heard people say that, but that's really not true. And then I'd have to reference to do something. too many of these arguments that are on Facebook and the internet, they're all based on emotions because it's much easier to kill an idea than it is to support it. So the only real answer to that is you have to have enough of the facts behind you to recognize when they're saying something that's completely bogus. Wind turbines, for example. Wind turbines kill all the birds. Okay, I've heard that one a lot. I was a meeting of various state uh, energy, Republican energy chairs, and I threw the question out there. I was talking about energy, obviously, and said, "What's the biggest killer of birds in the country?" Or yeah, biggest killer of birds. Is it wind turbines? Like half the hands went up. Yeah, yeah. So I threw the chart up there that showed, well, if you want to save birds, get rid of cats, because by far and away, cats kill more birds than any wind turbines. And actually, a couple of them were from oil producing states. The amount of birds killed by wind turbines are less than birds that are killed in um, oil on the surface near oil wells when it escapes. So you have to have facts, but you can't go like, I got a fact, I'm going to shove it in your face. I mean, that doesn't do. You got to say it with a little bit of love, maybe a little bit of lightness and humor, and then tell a story about something that happened in a meeting you were at or whatever. And we don't make up stories. God knows, 26 states, I got a gazillion stories to tell. But it's just the education, or I should say the lack of education about the admittedly complex subject of energy, that it's a never-ending struggle.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate the way you put that, right? That you can't just sort of like put it right in somebody's face. You have to kind of like listen a little bit and absorb, not be super judgmental of where, I mean, that approach is, I think, I don't know, 80% of it, right? Because you have to be able to like establish some kind of a bond with somebody before they can actually learn anything from you. And that takes patience, a lot of patience.
You know what one of the most powerful questions in a conversation like that is, that you ask whoever you're talking to?
What's that?
That's interesting. Why do you think that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of assertions out there, and then they have to come back and tell you, well, I saw it on Facebook. And then I try not to laugh out too. Did you look any further than Facebook?
Right.
Because it's easy to repeat talking points, but it's much more difficult to have the facts behind it. And usually people don't have the facts. They're just parroting what they heard. So if you, as the educator, know the facts, it's much easier to, combat these firmly held wrong beliefs.
Yeah. And I guess there's even some opportunity to try to like replace those falsehoods and misinformation with, fact-based information on the other side too, right? I mean, it's really hard because these algorithms are so powerful. So to try to inject some truth in there is really tough, but I assume you're trying to do that too, right?
Well, we try and do that through our organization, and we post on Twitter and Facebook and, try and amplify things. But the sheer amount of negative it's difficult to overcome. I mean, what do you see on the news every day? Negative. Pick a topic. It's never positive. It's always negative.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know it's a well-documented human thing, right? Negativity bias is a real thing. People are likely to click on what is, if it bleeds, it leads. They've said in the news for generations, right? Yeah. And people are going to click on the negative stories. It's just kind of the way it goes. So I want to ask you. You mentioned you work in 25 states. Texas is obviously one of those. Mm-hmm. You've been head of the organization for just about 2 years?
Going on 2 years, yeah.
So can you talk to a little compare and contrast, like some of the other states you work in? What's different about Texas? What do you like about Texas that you've seen so far? Where do you think Texas has something to teach other states, and where's Texas maybe behind a little bit, where Texas could learn from some peer states?
Well, since I live in North Carolina, let me establish my Texas creds, if I may. I was stationed at Fort Hood for 3 years. And then the Army, then the Army sent me
the great place. Isn't that what they call it? The good place, the great place? What is it?
I love Fort Hood. Now, Fort Cavazos. And I knew General Cavazos. He was there. He's a great American. When I was there, it was Fort Hood. And then I got my master's degree in operations research from UT Austin, Hook'em Horns. So sorry
Nice.
if there are any Aggies listening, but
I had Governor Perry on, so he
okay,
had a big Aggie flag behind him for anybody that watched the video. So
all
if
right,
Aggies are feeling upset, go look at the Perry video.
okay. Well,
You'll be all
I
right.
didn't want to offend any of your listening audience, but and I own property in Texas. So I was there for like 6 years. I got a good feeling. I love the state of Texas. But to your answer or to your question is, frankly, what the Texas legislature did last session and this session, I can't really explain why they're going off on a tangent to do some of the things they're doing. But what they're doing, we see that in other states as well. There's a bill about to be filed in North Carolina. Talks about onshore wind, and you have to notify everybody within 20 miles of where it's going to be because somebody doesn't like the flashing lights on top of the wind turbines because sometimes you have some Air Force jets flying around there as a training area, and I mean they don't interfere with the flight paths, but you gotta have that. The FAA says you have to have it. So, I mean, people glom onto the little issues that they think are like really, really important, and they might be to I don't know, 20 constituents in their district, but in the overall scheme of things, it's not. So this stuff's popping up all over the country, and actually, in my opinion, it's been getting worse over the last 4 or 5 years. We
Mhm.
went from I don't know like 200 county moratoriums and really restrictive ordinances 5 years ago to there's over 1,000 today. So, what we do and what you do on your podcast, and what a number of other groups do too, is try and stamp out the mis and disinformation. I think I always use the analogy if you're going to fight a forest fire, would you rather stomp on the match that some evil guy just threw in the pine straw before it spreads, or do you want to come in 3 days later when you got 100,000 acres burning? Pick one. Which one you want? And there's not enough people doing what we do, and I'm including you in that and other groups as well, to actually educate people about the truth of energy.
Yeah. And I think, in relation to the things you're talking about that Texas has done, or in some cases, like almost done, right? Some of these bad proposals did not pass last session, thankfully, because of a lot of the good work in the House, and hopefully that'll happen again this time. But what I often say on these things is like, and I'm curious your perspective on this. A lot of times I think what's going on with sort of the anti-renewable bills is what they're really, they think that they want more gas plants, or they want more nuclear
Mhm.
plants, or they want more geothermal, or they want more whatever. And they think that if you stop wind and solar batteries, then you'll get more of these other things. Senate Bill 388 that just passed the Senate.
Right.
I've written about it a lot on the newsletter. It says you have to have a megawatt of gas for every megawatt wind and solar. That really slows down wind and solar. There's another approach, which is like legislate for the things you want, like build those up. The
Right.
Texas legislature passed the Texas Energy Fund last time. The Senate and House and
Right.
governor all got together on that, passed it. We're going to get some more gas in the state. There's a nuclear bill that is moving through the House the day we're recording, again, March 26th. It just passed committee. It would put $2 billion towards new nuclear in the state of Texas, passed on a 10-1 vote, bipartisan
Mhm.
support. Like, do those things. You only have so many legislative days. You only have so many priorities you can actually move, right? Focus on the things you want. So I'm curious what you think of that kind of approach. And then also, nuclear, geothermal. Are you guys working on those things at Conservative Energy Network? Are there other technologies generating resources that you're excited about and are sort of within your purview or prioritized in your work?
Well, to your first point, I do agree that it's always better and usually a better vote getter if you're for something. I mean, if you're a negative Nelly and you're against everything, pretty soon people don't listen to you, and that includes your constituents. It's better to be for something. So if you want to incentivize A over B, okay, go incentivize it. But still, there's some element of the free market that has to go in there. Now, as far as incentivizing nuke, I'm not necessarily against that. I'm kind of for it because we as a country allowed it to die out. The supply chains, the knowledge base of people who actually know what to do in a nuclear power plant. So there is a role for government to incentivize certain technologies, but at some point in time, you need those incentives need to go away and things need to compete on their own. If you incentivize option C, whatever it might be, and it comes to fruition, you start building it, and it's costing $200 a megawatt hour, it's probably time to pull the plugs on that one and and let solar, wind, nuke, or geothermal, whatever it's going to be. So the answer to the rest of your question is yes, we do work in geothermal. Most of that work is in the West and in Texas. There's just not the hot rocks close enough to the surface to do it on the East Coast. North Carolina makes me particularly sad that you you got to drill like so far down that it's just not economical. Nuclear, yeah, we're for that, but it's not to replace anything we currently have. And the one thing you didn't mention was transmission. We do a
Yeah,
lot of
talk
work
to me
in
about that.
transmission
Hmm.
because that's important. You can generate all the electrons you want, but if you can't get them from where they're generated to where they're needed, and there's a heck of a lot of work needs to be done in that, not only at FERC at the national level, but within certain states too. And some states are further along in spurring new transmission lines than others.
Yep, Texas has a big decision ahead of it. The Public Utility Commission, sometime in the next month or so, is going to decide on a 765 kilovolts or 345 kilovolt, what they're calling backbone for the state. And we don't have any 765. I don't know if you guys have any. That's like extra high voltage. I don't know if you guys have any in
I
North
don't think we
Carolina.
have any in North Carolina, but I'm not
Yeah, we don't
sure.
have. Yeah, we don't have any here yet. But I think it's time. It's like for a modern economy. I mean that the Chinese are putting up 765 like it's going out of style, and we don't have any yet. It's like
Yeah,
we are in a race, particularly on AI and meeting this kind of load growth, and it's harder here, right? It's a democracy. We argue over stuff,
yeah,
and that's proper. We should have a democracy. We should argue over stuff,
we
and
should.
we should build too. Like we got to figure out how to make sure that we build.
We are
Um,
nation builders, to your point. If you go back 100, 200 years, we've always been building things. We make stuff and we're pretty doggone good at it. China wouldn't be where it is if they didn't steal most of our plans and technology. I mean, seriously. So,
yeah,
yeah, we need to build
yeah.
more.
Yeah, there's all kinds of IP that is, if you, everybody kind of knows if you take your IP over there, it's probably going to get
Yeah.
stolen. But yeah, I think, John, though, like to a certain extent, it's gotten away from us a little bit. I'm not sure we are right now in 2025 a nation of builders. It's in our DNA. It's in our history. I don't know that we're really living up to that right now, though.
And I'd agree with that too. I think we've, at the state level and pretty much every state, even the great state of Texas, and at the national level, we've made things so complex to protect the one person or the one child or the one puppy from potential injury on a 1 in 10 gazillion chances that we over legislate this stuff. We over protect ourselves. You cannot. I got this theory, and it has to do with liberalism. Is that if you pass a bill to do protection, and then it goes for a year or two, my liberal friends will come back because there's always a failure in it, no matter what the topic is. It's like, we passed this bill 2 years ago, and it was a good thought, but it just wasn't tight enough. We need to put more on and more. And all of a sudden, I mean, I think that's what happened to the EPA. Hell, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, where the river burned. Okay, I know what bad pollution looks like. Yeah, I couldn't breathe on some days because there's so much crap in the air from the coal plants. As a Boy Scout, I saw the forests in northern Ohio and eastern or western Pennsylvania dying. You need regulation to protect people, but
Yep.
you can't protect anybody from every possible bad thing that might happen in the world. And I think that's where we are now. We need to loosen some of that stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, like so much else in life, right? It's like the extremes and the poles typically don't work. It's really about sort of where do you turn that dial to the optimal point where there is protection of the public. Like you said, some regulation is obviously needed. Nobody wants their river to be on fire. I think everybody can agree on that. But if it does go too far, you do slow down building of things, and we need to build them. We need to manufacture in this country. We need to build transmission lines. We need to build power plants of lots of different varieties, and that's all. So it really is that question of balance. So you think and this is probably obvious because you're a self-described conservative, but like the dial's been turned too far towards sort of regulation, and it's become too heavy-handed, and we need to kind of turn that back the other way.
I agree, and I think there's too many reviews of reviews of reviews. I mean, take transmission line for example. I was at a conference about a year ago, and there was a major utility in PJM that talked about how it took 19 years to build a 9-mile stretch of high voltage transmission line because of all the hoops they had to jump through. That's just ridiculous. I mean, even today, in the best of circumstances, it's going to take 10 years to do all this. We don't have 10 years to wait to build more transition. We don't have 10 years to wait to build more generation. We got a huge issue, and we got it right now, today. What are we going to do now?
Yeah. Somewhere behind me, I've got that book, Superpower by Russell Gold, where he's talking about the effort to build a major transmission line. And it not only wasn't done in 19 years, it was never completed because every state had veto power over it. And like, those are lines that really would have helped the country at multiple points over the last, many years. It is something that I think is valuable about Texas's independence from FERC, and why I'm somewhat defensive of it, is that, we don't have to go through some of those federal there's of course still state processes, and there's due process, and that needs to still be there. We can build transmission faster in the state, and that's going to be put to the test. Like, that's the claim everybody in Texas makes. We're about to find out with this high voltage project, so we'll see.
I hope so. I know the capability is there because I've talked to some of the largest builders, private builders of transmission in the country, and they tell me that they can. But the expense just continues to skyrocket because of all the hoops they have to jump through. And again, I don't want burning rivers. I don't want air I can't breathe, and I don't want to kill all the wildlife, because wildlife is basically a trust. They're in trust. They belong to everybody. We don't want to kill them. But you know what? I think humans are at the top of the food chain, and we need to build stuff to make everybody's life better, no matter income level, no matter race, gender, whatever. I don't care. We need to build stuff.
Let me also ask you, just shifting gears just a little bit, but kind of staying in this realm of like different technologies and solutions that help with our energy challenges. I have spent a large part of my career and talk a lot on this podcast about demand side solutions, energy efficiency, and demand response, distributed solar and storage, all these kinds of things. I am hopeful because I think there's different ways to go about getting an active demand side, getting more participation from the demand side, like, reducing peak demand to increase reliability, paying people to participate in programs, all voluntary if they want to put money back in their pockets. There are those programs are most prominent, not exclusively at all, because Arkansas, Oklahoma, a lot of red states have really good energy efficiency programs, but it's more associated with like California and Massachusetts.
Right.
I think that there's opportunities for conservatives to really figure out how to kind of bring a market lens to that demand side. This is sort of something I think about a lot, and I think might actually work in Texas. But if you did you work on energy efficiency at the North Carolina legislature?
Well, I personally did. Yeah, I did. Matter of fact, I had a bill that passed the House almost unanimously, and it died in my friends in the Senate. And basically, it was just it was looking at the inventory of state-owned buildings and categorizing them by age and size. If you got a 50,000 square foot warehouse and it's 20 years old, and we're going to keep it, we probably have to update HVAC and whatever else we got to. So let's do a study of those and use performance contracting to figure out, when we do it, how do we save money on energy costs? Because you can build all the buildings you want, but if they leak heat and air, I mean, you're just going to pay. I thought it was a great bill. So did a lot of contractors. My friends in the Senate, they thought the exact quote was, "Well, if the Department of Administration wanted to do it, they can already do it." Well, they could, but a legislature exists to provide direction to different parts of the government. So all I was trying to do is say, you guys do this and we'll end up saving money. some of the universities in North Carolina actually did it on their own. And guess what? They saved hundreds of thousands of dollars from campus to campus of their own energy costs. Then it just went back to the state budget because they weren't incentivized to do it. Like if you save $1 million, you get to keep 50 grand or 100 grand, which was another part of the thing. But
that's a great way to do it, John, too, because you not only incentivize them, but then you can actually use those dollars from the savings to go to the deferred maintenance, right? Which if you talk to anybody that works in the public sector, there's so much deferred maintenance, which basically just means you got people in public schools and county buildings, state buildings, all that stuff, just like using duct tape and whatever they can to like keep stuff running along rather than upgrading. So give them some incentive to save money and then let them keep a portion of that to knock out that deferred maintenance list, right?
And here's why those kind of ideas don't get traction for the most part, because they're boring.
Deferred maintenance is boring, John? That's exciting. Come on. I know.
Maybe to you and me.
What you mean.
But saving money is boring unless it's some large muscle action where I'm going to cut the Department of whatever at the state. That's exciting. We're saving the things that are simple that can save taxpayers literally millions and tens of millions of dollars. They're boring, and you have to get people excited about voting for a boring bill, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I wish it were easier to get people excited about that kind of stuff. And, you talk about energy efficiency too. We could build a heck of a lot more energy efficient houses and buildings and everything else. Usually it costs 5 to 10% more when you design it to be more energy efficient. And because governments usually force lowest bidder awards on the contracts, we don't do it. So to state
not looking at the life cycle, right? Of like when,
exactly. Right. So you're going to spend $10 million on a building and spend 5 times as much on the energy. If you spend $11 million, you'd save money in the long run. But we don't do that.
Yeah, a lot of progress to be made. A lot of potential on the demand side. So I want to ask you also. Should have asked earlier. It's obviously a big part of who you are. You're a veteran with a long distinguished service in the U.S. Army. For those that are listening and not seeing the video, you've got a "I Want You" for the U.S. Army with Uncle Sam right behind you. You're retired as a lieutenant colonel. Can you talk a little bit about how energy policy and national security overlap, and where your military experience has informed your work at any part of your career, whether as a legislator or now at CEN? Yeah.
Well, energy is national security. I mean, we could talk about foreign players trying to come into the grid and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at a military base, you have to have a secure, reliable, unattackable, if that's a word, energy source. I go back to when I was still in active duty here at Fort Bragg. There was a major Corps command post exercise. They were all off in Kansas doing this thing, and I wasn't there. I was a staff officer at Corps, but it's myself and a brigadier general. We were staging out hurricane relief it was a hurricane who hit the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the Army has one of the, actually, it's got these specialized battalions of nothing but generators that can generate untold amounts of energy, bigger than anything you've ever seen. We were air shipping this stuff out and shipping some of it by sea to get down to the Virgin Islands. And at like 2 a.m. when the planes are going out on time and we're looking at each other, instead of playing cards, we were talking about this very thing, energy, well before I got in the legislature. And it was like, what would happen right now if all the if all the energy to Fort Bragg went out? How are we going to get this stuff out of here? I mean, it'd be crippling. At the time, it only had one main line in, and the major utility provider around 2004 or 5 actually put another 2 redundant lines in there. So just imagine it was bad enough if energy would have been interrupted, shipping supplies and energy generation equipment down to St. Thomas. What about if you're shipping out ammunition to a war front or you're sending soldiers somewhere? You could be literally crippled at home. Norfolk, largest naval base in the world. Not every ship is at sea all the time. These are national security issues to make sure that all elements of the military and the command structure has enough energy in the event of a natural disaster or a national disaster
Yep.
that comes from some foreign ill-intentioned agents. I mean, I'm at a loss for words about how important it is, but it's extremely important.
Yeah, I mean you can't overstate how important that is, right? I mean having that reliable power on site. This is another place, John, where I think so we were just talking about energy efficiency and saying it's not sexy. I think something that kind of is sexy, what you were saying it was boring. You didn't say not sexy. That's one way it gets referred to all the time. It's like, oh, energy efficiency is not sexy, it's boring, nobody wants to
Uh,
talk about it. But when you expand the aperture a little bit and you look at the demand side, and energy efficiency is part of it, but you also get into, for instance, microgrids, which I think are very
mhm,
exciting, sexy, whatever word you want to put on it. Everybody wants to talk about these, these days. There was a great report. We'll put it in the show notes. It was out of Carnegie Mellon that talked about how microgrids and distributed energy resources are fantastic for national security because they can be islanded and protected from the rest of the grid. So if you
right.
had the kind of malicious attack you're talking about, which would usually be some flavor of cyber attack that could cripple the grid, these are nightmare scenarios, but they're sort of like what you call a tail risk. It's not super high probability, but it's not zero, and we've got to be prepared for those kinds of things, just like you're saying. This is one of the areas where the military, and I would hope that this would spread across Democratic or Republican administration, having that power on site. And that could be a mix. Again, it's not about any one source. It's about, just like on the bulk grid, it's about having that mix. You have some solar, you have some storage, you have some gas, you have some diesel, like you have all those things because the redundancy is good. And solar
Mhm,
and storage is part of that because you can have outages of your natural gas system. New York was almost
absolutely.
without natural gas just at one point in the last couple of years when we were in a winter storm and gas supplies. That was more a natural disaster, obviously, than a malicious actor. So I think there's huge potential for that kind of thing. I don't know. It might have been you were out of the military in the 90s. That may have been like right before those kinds of solutions. But have you talked to your counterparts of the military about things like microgrids or on-site
Oh,
generation?
yeah, and I'm going to tell you what the problem with that is. It's not the concept of it. It's the fact that the Department of Defense, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, on federal land, state of North Carolina, one of the first bills I filed in 2013 was called the Energy Freedom Act, that was going to allow Fort Bragg to have on-site generation for that exact reason that we've been talking about. And the monopoly utility here, because the law, North Carolina said then and still says, if you generate electricity and put it on the grid, your utility have to be treated like that. The Department of Defense recognized that, so they weren't going to go against state law, even though it's federal land. I, I had a major blow up with our utility in North Carolina. If our Secretary Hedgepeth, I would say, you know what? Defense overrides your state law. On federal property, I'm going to do exactly what you just suggested. I'm going to have our own generation, and if you don't like it, well, too bad. But that's not the policy of DoD then or now. I think it'd
Yeah.
be a great policy change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, in Texas, in most parts of the state, some parts of the state we do have monopoly utilities, but in most of the states, of course, within ERCOT, outside of the municipals, there is the ability for a customer to site their own energy without having to go through that tortuous utility process and the whole mother may I associated with all of that. So we do have at a lot of the military bases, there's actually one of them in San Antonio is within a municipal utility, but CPS Energy worked with I believe that's Fort Sam Houston has a pretty major
Okay.
microgrid. I'll put it in the show notes. If I get it wrong, whatever the right base is will be in the show notes. And then, you mentioned Fort Cavazos where you said you spent several years. They have a microgrid up there. And as a matter of fact, during Winter Storm Uri, they credited that for saving some tens of millions of dollars to U.S. taxpayers because they were able to generate some of their own power on site.
And that, Doug, is why I like living in Texas, why I like Texas so much, and why I still like Texas, even though I don't live there anymore. But you asked me the question, different states across the nation. I mean, Texas
Yep.
is really unique in the way that it handles energy, and there's going to be some oddball bills that come by every once in a while, and hopefully people do the right thing and vote them down. Uh, but the rest of the country, by and large, does not treat energy like Texas does. Whether you're in an RTO structure, whether you're in a vertically integrated monopoly utility, it it ain't like Texas.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome here anytime. Come back to Texas early and often. Keep visiting here. We need your voice in the state. I want to ask you just another question or two before we wrap.
Sure.
I'm also curious, again, from a legislator perspective. Um, how and when, under what circumstances you would work across the aisle, right? We talk about principles earlier. I can tell, I haven't known you a long time, but I can tell, even as long as I've known you, you're a principled guy. You're never going to compromise on
All
your
right.
principles. Compromise is kind of like not compromising principles, but compromising on policy is kind of like the heart of our system. If it doesn't happen, things kind of break down. I think it's part of what we're experiencing as a country is everybody's kind of run to the polls on both sides, and the center maybe isn't holding. I hope that's wrong. I hope the center does kind of hold and we can work across. How and when, can you give examples of when you worked across the aisle, still staying true to your conservative principles?
Yeah, I mean, the last big bill that I was a primary sponsor of was House Bill 951, passed in 2021. Right? Uh, it's at the time, majority Republican House, majority Republican Senate, and a Democrat governor who we're about, like, if you watch me, it's like my fingers going way apart. Most things were like really far apart. So,
Yeah.
so the utility uh, wanted performance-based rate making. We worked on that, and then
Did you guys
for
do that? Did that pass? You have
well, it
performance-based rate making and
passed, but
yeah.
the one mistake that we put in there, it was at the discretion of the utility, and as of yet, they haven't used it, which is a little surprising to me because I think they could use it. And for listeners who don't know what that is, it's instead of being paid on capital improvements, it's there are other goals that can be set that the utility can be paid their rate of return on, which is kind of thinking outside the box. There have been a couple of states that have done that. None really have used it that much, to my surprise. Anyway, they wanted that,
No,
and then
well, but before you
yeah,
move on, I want to double click on that just for a second, because
okay,
this is something that has come up a lot in Texas, particularly after Hurricane Beryl. There were some hearings in the Senate that there were discussions where legislators, Senator Colhorst, Chairman Schwartner, they were asking questions of the PUC chairman about, are customers' incentives aligned with the utility incentives? Because as the utility business model may be broken, where your incentive is to deploy capital and make a rate
right,
of return, and there aren't really a very clear performance metric, not even, much less an incentive, just a metric. Like, what are you judged on?
right.
And so if you don't define that, what are you doing as right? I mean, you're basically like trying to spend money. And so I think probably the reason why in North Carolina it's not being used, it was less to the discretion of the utility, is it's sort of the burden to hand, right? Or, like
It is.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I mean, the utility model worked great from the 1920s, 30s, and the electrification of America. I
yep.
mean, we saved tens of billions of dollars doing it the way we did. Today, is it the right model? I don't know. I don't know what to replace it with, but I don't think it really serves the needs of ratepayers as well as a different model could. But
I
working
totally agree
across the
with you.
aisle, so that was a piece of it. And the other piece of it, well, North Carolina showcased the case against coal ash. If you remember back to the Dan River coal ash spills, so we passed
I do.
legislation, made the utility excavate millions of tons of this stuff and bury it in line. Anyway, so part of that is part of the fallback from or fallout from that was shutting down coal plants. And yeah, you got CO2 reduction. So we went back and forth. How many are going to shut down? Do you tell the utilities a stranded asset? Blah blah blah. All this stuff, very complicated. So basically, what we said was we set in the statute, this is a Republican House and Senate, mind you, reduction based on the 2005 standard of carbon, 70% reduction by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2050 at least cost. We said, and we kicked it to the Utilities Commission, be the arbiter of this. In North Carolina, it's called the Carbon Plan. And the utility has to come in every so often and say, here's how we're going to meet that at least cost. And we talk about that. Now, first of all, usually the enemy, if you want to say, isn't really the other party, it's the other chamber. You know, when you're both of the same party, it's, So, I mean, this thing, we all worked on it in the House and the Senate for just under a year. And somebody asked me what it was like doing that. And I said, it's like this. It's like, imagine you going to work every day and in your office there's a dentist chair and the dentist comes in and pulls every one of your teeth and you have no Novocaine while he does that. And then the next day you come in and do the same thing. It's painful. And then because it's not just chambers and parties, then you have all the other interest groups and you got utilities want something, the people who own industry want something, business owners want something, everybody wants something, and trying to get all that in one big plan. I mean, if you don't work with the other party, with other people, you're never going to get anything done.
Yeah. So that bill, it was 951. It was the Energy Solutions for North Carolina Act or something along those lines. That did pass, and it had bipartisan.
It's still in effect right now.
Bipartisan support.
Bipartisan support. Great votes in both chambers. The governor had a big signing ceremony at the mansion where Republicans and Democrats. I love that line from Ghostbusters. When they're talking to the mayor. I don't know. Maybe it's too old for most, but it's like cats and dogs living together. It's like those Republicans and Democrats all in one place. A big kumbaya moment, and then we went back to our corners after that ceremony. But it was bipartisan. I mean, my experience, most enduring bills, maybe not the best, but enduring are ones that have bipartisan support. When you ram something through just because you can, when the pendulum goes the other way, it gets undone.
Yep. One last question, and then I'll ask you, what I forgot to ask you, what you want to add in. But one more before I do that. I got to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act as well. So, like we talked about the United States being, we're a nation of builders. We've always built, we've always invented, all that kind of stuff. We have seen a huge increase in manufacturing. A lot of it in North Carolina, a lot of it in Texas, a lot of it throughout the South. Obviously, President Trump ran on repealing at least parts of it. He was never like super, well, maybe not never. He was usually not super specific about that. And now there's, of course, the 21 House Republicans sent a letter to the Speaker and said, we want to be careful with that. What are your thoughts on the IRA? Do you have thoughts on what's specifically worth keeping, needs to be kept, maybe what shouldn't be kept? Any thoughts on the IRA? I'm not asking you to make a prognostication because nobody can figure out what's going on right now, right? But if you want to prognosticate, feel free. But more kind of, where do you think? You can take any part of that you want, but particularly like which aspects of it you think are most important to protect?
Well, I and my policy people at CEN took a really deep dive into the IRA last May, before we knew who was going to win the election, because at the time, if you go back to last May, nobody even knew it was running on the Democrat side. At least they thought they didn't change. But look into the future. It's like, what things in the IRA are good policy and should be kept? What things in the IRA they probably could work if they had some tweaks, because there's a little too much, maybe too many Christmas ornaments on there. It's just not structured right. And then which things from a conservative viewpoint should, they should have never been in there in the first place. They never had bipartisan support in the entire history of whatever idea it was. So you get rid of that. So we did this, came up with a big report that we did not make public, but I share with congressional members and U.S. Senate members on occasion. I'm not going to say who or where, but through a conservative lens, and we've made some very specific recommendations. And then overall, I think when you break it down to those three things, there are things in there that even though no Republicans voted on it, are really Republican and Democrat shared ideas from previous bills that had great bipartisan support. I don't think anybody's going to argue against creating jobs and bringing industry back to the United States and supporting new industries, which is a part of it, which that's part of this picking winners and losers thing, that I don't like to pick winners and losers. So the other big failing, I think, was when you say we're going to run incentives for 10 years, you can never control how much money you're going to spend. For example, when the IRA was passed, the CBO graded it at like it was going to cost $280 billion. Well, the latest grading of the CBO, I think, is over $1 trillion now. So, you got our friend inflation, you got this, yeah, everything costs more. So now you go from $280 billion, roughly whatever the number was around there, and you go to $1 trillion. In congressional speak, I think now they're talking real money, And the problem with the 10 years is some of these things when you're trying to build an industry, like the supply chain for offshore wind, the supply chain for advanced nuclear, it's going to take that long to do it. So,
yeah,
all energy is subsidized in the U.S. Nobody can prove to me that oil and gas is not subsidized. It's just buried in the tax code and it's been there forever. And you know what?
I mean, it's
I'm okay
two
with
main
that.
provisions, right? Yeah, it's
I'm
intangible
fine
drilling
with that.
costs. Yeah, it's intangible drilling costs. It's oil depletion allowance.
Right.
And I have this conversation all the time. People are like, wind and solar are so heavily subsidized. Like oil and gas has been subsidized for its whole existence. And look, if you want to get rid of all the subsidies, get rid of all the subsidies. Get rid of all the oil and gas subsidies, all the nuclear subsidies, all the wind and solar subsidies. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to make power a lot more expensive for everybody.
That's
and
right.
Nobody's getting reelected. Good luck.
And that's right. And the next people just go back to the way it was and subsidize. So it's okay to subsidize energy because it's a national priority. America runs on good, inexpensive energy. If we don't have that, I guess I can say this: we're screwed as a nation.
Yep.
But again, conservative principles, don't pick winners and losers. Let's recognize that everything's subsidized, and then try and balance those. And then let markets do what markets are going to do. If you got balanced subsidies, everybody's kind of playing on the same level playing field, and then let markets do it. And if technology A ends up with dismal failure, well, you know what? Stop subsidizing it and reinforce success where you got things that are working.
Yeah. I'm particularly interested in what happens with the provisions that are related to manufacturing because we're seeing these plants. There was just another announcement just last week of an $850 million plant, over 1,000 permanent jobs in Rockdale, Texas, about 50, 60 miles north of where I'm sitting right now in Austin. Those kinds of plants probably don't stick around if the IRA provisions that pay the incentive based on manufactured components in the United States. So it's going to be interesting to see how and which parts they go after.
Yeah, it is. And the problem that they have is on the campaign trail, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. You got to have a bill payer somewhere. And I guess I'd just say I'm glad I'm not a congressman right now. But.
John, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I do want to ask you, I always do this at the end. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wish that I had, or anything else you'd like to add before we end?
Man, I don't know about that. No, you've done a pretty good job of grilling me here this afternoon. I think you asked all the pertinent points because we've talked about generation, we've talked about transmission, we've talked about conservative principles and how those should be applied to generation, distribution, transmission. Look, I'm always available. Any of your listeners want to talk to me, they can just look up a Conservative Energy Network. It's all spelled out, .org. Learn more about us, get in contact with me. And it's really been a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon. I really appreciate it, Doug.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we'll put a link to all your, social handles and the website and all that so folks can find you real easy. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, John. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Energy Capital Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please like, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, have a great day.